Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into what is, I mean, it's arguably the most compressed, dramatic, and just consequential period in modern
And
history.
absolutely, those 12 weeks spanning April to June 1945.
Yeah, exactly. This is the moment when the Allied armies are closing in from the east and the west, and victory in Europe is, uh, it's literally within their sights.
It's just a period of incredible acceleration and contrast.
So?
Well, in Europe, you've got Adolf Hitler. Once the master of this huge empire, now he's just a recluse in his underground bunker. His power is shrinking not just by the hour, but, by the minute.
And yet his final words, these sort of nihilistic orders,
Yeah.
they still held this terrible power.
Absolutely. Determining the fate of hundreds of thousands of German souls, even at the very end.
And then, crucially, on the complete opposite side of the world, you have his Axis partner, Imperial Japan.
Preparing to meet the sheer, staggering power of the United States.
We're talking massive amphibious armies, huge naval forces leapfrogging across the Pacific.
And those B-29s just raining explosives down on Japanese cities. The military scale of it all is it's a critical part of the story here.
But there's something else going on, isn't there? Beneath all that military momentum.
There is. There's this profound political anxiety swirling underneath it all, and you see it most acutely with Winston Churchill.
Right. Even as victory is promising to be his finest hour, he's worried.
He is deeply weary and anxious. He's constantly worrying that the exhausted, financially drained British Empire is going to be marginalized.
Or even worse, just sidelined by the Americans and the Russians.
Exactly. As the Endgame comes into view, he has this keen, almost prophetic sense of caution about what the post-war world is going to look like.
So our deep dive today is really about that excruciating cost of victory.
And the shocking revelation of unimaginable Nazi horrors.
Plus the whole fraught political landscape that emerged in the shadow of the collapsing Third Reich, and of course, the fanatical resistance of Japan.
Our mission here is to explore how these events, on two totally different sides of the globe, were speeding toward a conclusion.
But with profoundly different price tags.
Yeah.
In human lives and in political stability. So let's start our journey in Europe. Late March, early April 1945.
The Rhine River.
The final major natural obstacle separating the Allied armies, commanded by General Eisenhower, from the industrial heart of Germany.
It wasn't just a river, though. It was Germany's strategic fortress wall,
And that's why the Germans had thrown everything they had into demolishing every single crossing point.
The sources confirm it. 46 road and rail bridges spanning the Rhine, all of them successfully blown up.
Which meant the Allies had to plan these huge, complicated set-piece river assaults.
But there was one exception, almost a miracle, really.
The Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen.
Exactly. 3 weeks before our time frame here, the Americans had seized it intact. The demolition charges just didn't fully detonate.
A massive tactical coup. It secured a vital bridgehead for the First U.S. Army.
But the irony is just striking.
In what way?
The bridge itself couldn't withstand the constant German attacks. Artillery, air attacks. It finally just collapsed 10 days after they captured it.
So it secured the breach, but its own lifespan was, what, fleeting.
It really underscores the desperation of the German defense, even at that late stage.
And this brings us to the main crossing attempts, which really highlight the personality clashes on the Western Front.
You're talking about Montgomery versus Patton.
Of course. So Field Marshal Montgomery, he's leading the 21st Army Group, and he's charged with this massive, methodical Operation Plunder.
Meticulously planned, very organized, a huge concentration of Canadian, British, and American troops.
And they took all their objectives with relatively minor losses.
But you have to contrast that almost theatrical operation with the actions of General Patton.
Right. His well-documented rivalry with Montgomery meant he was determined to settle some old scores.
He was dead set on getting across the Rhine first, but without any of that careful staging.
So he chooses a point 150 miles upstream from Montgomery, crosses at Oppenheim.
And he moves his Third Army's 5th Infantry Division, as the sources put it, without any of Montgomery's pomp and circumstance.
It was intentionally low profile.
Right.
A rapid assault just to show Montgomery's caution.
And it worked. He managed to get 5 full divisions across the Rhine where German opposition was just minimal and disorganized.
So this move was less about one key bridgehead and more about the psychology of it.
Absolutely. It showed that the door to Germany was now wide open. What was left of the German forces, often just scattered units of the Volkssturm, old men and young boys, they couldn't offer any real resistance.
Speaking of personalities and high drama, we have to talk about Churchill.
His audacious visit during Operation Plunder.
He travels all the way to Eisenhower's tactical headquarters just to personally witness the operation.
And this is where his legendary stubbornness just comes right out. He's 70 years old.
And he's determined to get into the action.
He leaps into an American landing craft and crosses the Rhine himself.
Which was, as our sources say, much to Eisenhower's dismay.
Well, of course. The Supreme Commander had very legitimate concerns for the Prime Minister's safety. There were still German snipers active across the river.
So Eisenhower is trying to frantically persuade him to come back.
But Churchill's being there, right on the front, it reflected a much deeper anxiety he had.
He was obsessively worried about the looming division of Europe.
It wasn't just paranoia. He deeply believed that the ailing President Roosevelt had seriously underestimated the ruthlessness of Joseph Stalin and the Russians.
He was convinced the Soviet advance wouldn't stop at the agreed-upon lines.
And that political fear directly influenced his military preference. He wanted Eisenhower to push all the way to Berlin.
Even if it meant a few thousand extra casualties.
Right, just to hold that geopolitical leverage against the Soviets before Stalin's forces could get there.
But this is the core difference in their priorities, isn't it?
Absolutely. For Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander, his mission was the destruction of German military power.
The armies, not the capital city.
Exactly. Berlin, after the Yalta Conference, was already slated to be deep within the Soviet zone of occupation.
So a costly race for a political prize that you'd have to hand over anyway.
It just made no military sense to him.
Plus, there was that other factor driving his caution.
The national redoubt.
This widespread, though ultimately false, intelligence about a powerful Nazi defensive position in the Alps.
Right. The fear was that the fanatical SS would consolidate there and start a guerrilla war.
So Eisenhower diverts significant American efforts southwards to neutralize this supposed threat, prioritizing that over a political race for Berlin.
And while those big personalities are clashing over Berlin, the sheer crushing weight of the Allied military is just destroying what's left of the German army.
In the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland.
The key move was this massive encircling maneuver. Operation Plunder was the anchor on the northern flank.
Then the American Ninth Army formed the Northern Pincer, driving southeast.
And the Southern Pincer was the 1st U.S. Army, driving northeast.
And the link-up was fast. The sources say 72 hours after they met near Lippstadt, the encirclement of the Ruhr Pocket was complete.
It was a massive, decisive trap.
More than massive. It was the total annihilation of an entire army group.
Trapped inside that shrinking pocket were the remnants of 21 German divisions.
A staggering number.
Yeah.
430,000 German soldiers of Army Group B.
Under Field Marshal Walter Model. And alongside them, millions of exhausted German civilians and foreign slave laborers.
For Model, the situation was hopeless. He wasn't willing to surrender, so...
He committed suicide on April 21st.
And by that same day, the fighting was essentially over.
Yeah, the sources confirm that 325,000 German soldiers then filed into American captivity.
But that created a whole new problem, didn't it? A logistical nightmare.
A huge one. Housing, feeding, and caring for 500,000 starving, sick men in the final weeks of the war.
It led to a terrible humanitarian crisis. These makeshift enclosures, the Rhine River camps.
Because of the sheer numbers and the chaos of the collapse, hundreds, maybe thousands, died in the days and weeks that followed.
A clear sign that the German army, on the Western Front at least, was completely broken.
And while his troops are surrendering in their hundreds of thousands, Hitler, in his Berlin bunker, is descending into this furious, world-ending nihilism.
He saw defeat not as a military failure, but as a betrayal by the German people themselves.
And the orders he issued were just absolutely chilling, like a complete abandonment of his own population. He demanded the final battle be conducted without consideration for our own population.
Which leads to the infamous Scorched Earth Command, the Nero Decree.
He ordered the destruction of everything. All industrial plants, electricity works, waterworks, gas works, all food and clothing stores.
The goal was to leave a desert for the advancing Allies.
And his justification for it is maybe the most shocking window into his mindset.
If the war is lost, the German nation will also perish. There is no need to consider what the people require for continued existence.
It was a declaration that if he couldn't have Germany, no one could, not even the Germans.
We have to shift our focus now, because while Europe is collapsing, the war against Imperial Japan is escalating into this crucible of unprecedented brutality.
Which brings us to Operation Iceberg, the invasion of Okinawa.
And the context here is so important. The fight for Iwo Jima had been incredibly bitter.
6,825 American fatalities, a huge price.
And Okinawa was seen as the necessary next step. It's only 340 miles from southern Japan.
The goal was to secure this island as a massive logistical springboard for the final invasion of the Japanese mainland.
The scale of the force assembled for Okinawa was just overwhelming.
Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr. commanded the 10th U.S. Army. His forces were staggering: 102,000 soldiers, 88,000 Marines.
And 18,000 Navy personnel for the ground fight alone.
And supporting them was the largest fleet the U.S. had ever assembled in the Pacific, 1,600 ships.
Including 40 aircraft carriers and 80 battleships.
This colossal force was tasked with just blasting Okinawa into submission. The bombardment started at 6 a.m. on April 1st, 1945.
Which ironically was Easter Sunday.
After 3 hours of intense naval shelling, the troops storm ashore at Higuchi.
And here's the startling detail, the thing that should have been a huge red flag.
The assault waves encountered absolutely no opposition at all.
Men, the initial success was breathtaking. By noon, they'd secured the vital airfields at Kadena and Yomatan.
By nightfall, they had a beachhead 9 miles wide with more than 60,000 men ashore, and the Japanese were just nowhere to be seen.
So the American High Command is hoping maybe they've broken. Maybe the bombardment worked.
A hope that was immediately and brutally dashed.
The lack of troops on the beaches, it revealed this strategic shift in Japanese defense.
Exactly. A lesson learned from the bloody failures on islands like Tarawa and Saipan.
So the Japanese 32nd Army, 120,000 strong, had positioned itself inland.
A deliberate move to avoid the American naval guns and force the invaders to fight an infantry war deep inside the island's rocky, forested terrain.
The force was substantial. 70,000 regular troops, plus another 50,000 poorly trained local conscripts.
And the geography of Okinawa, with its limestone caves and deep ravines, was perfect for defense.
They built the famed Shuri Line defenses across the southern third of the island.
This wasn't just a line, it was a vast, layered complex. Interlocking machine gun nests, pre-sighted mortars, extensive underground tunnels, all centered on Shuri Castle.
Designed to absorb the initial shock and then just bleed the American ground troops white.
A systematic attrition. They were ready for a long, lethal grind.
The initial American advance was swift in the north. The 6th Marine Division split the Japanese forces.
But even there, they immediately hit fierce resistance, a natural fortress of wooded ridges and ravines. It took them until April 18th just to clear that peninsula.
But the real horror was waiting in the south.
The 24th Army Corps began its push towards Shuri, and they slammed right into the fortified lines.
Battling for positions they grimly named things like Cactus Ridge.
The Japanese would launch these banzai charges at night, only to pull back into their tunnels before the counterattack.
The fighting for Cactus Ridge was a bitter hand-to-hand struggle. It took until April 9th and cost 1,500 American casualties for that one ridge.
The American advance had clearly stalled. The Shuri line was holding firm.
And while the ground troops were stalled, the air and sea battle introduced the most terrifying element of Japanese resistance.
The kamikaze attacks.
This was psychological warfare wrapped in a military tactic.
The Japanese High Command assembled more than 2,000 aircraft for what they called Operation Chrysanthemum.
Many were older models, packed with extra fuel and bombs, turning them into flying incendiaries.
Flown by young, often inexperienced pilots on a preordained, one-way suicide mission.
Designed to overwhelm the American fleet through sheer mass and sacrifice.
The term kamikaze, it means divine wind. It references a 13th century typhoon that sank Chinese invasion fleets.
The hope was this modern divine wind would do the same thing, scatter and break the American fleet.
Operation Chrysanthemum launched its massed attack on April 6th, and though Allied fighters shot down dozens, enough broke through.
And they caused just unimaginable devastation. The anti-aircraft gunners fought desperately for 2 straight days.
The impact on the fleet was immediate and horrific. In that first assault alone, 13 American destroyers were either badly damaged or sunk.
Those ships on radar picket duty, far from the main fleet, they were so vulnerable.
And the attacks never stopped for the next 3 months.
By the end of the campaign, the kamikazes had sunk 36 Allied vessels and badly damaged another 368.
And the statistics on the human cost are they're stark. The vast majority of the 497 American sailors killed and the 4,874 wounded during the invasion of Okinawa.
Perished during those kamikaze attacks.
For the U.S. Navy, it was a sobering, bloody indication of the fanatical resistance awaiting them as they got closer to the mainland.
So we need to pull back to Europe now, because while that's happening, the Allied armies are driving ever deeper into Germany.
And their casualties are generally lighter at this point because most German troops were keener to give up rather than fight.
But during this advance, they start uncovering the ghastly, systematized evidence of the Nazi crimes.
The concentration and labor camps, the revelation starts almost immediately.
April 4th, 1945. Troops from Patton's Third Army overrun the Ohrdruf labor camp.
And the sites they discovered were just beyond the soldiers' comprehension.
Piles of corpses, some covered with lime, others partially incinerated.
These were prisoners the fleeing SS guards considered too ill to walk on the evacuation marches. So they just shot them and left them behind.
Then came the liberation of Buchenwald, a much larger camp complex outside Weimar.
Not an industrial extermination camp like Auschwitz, but still a place of absolute terror. 56,000 inmates had perished there.
And the Third Army liberated 21,000 sick and starving inmates.
The leadership felt this immediate moral obligation to bear witness.
General Eisenhower himself visited Ohrdruf on April 12th, and he took Patton and General Omar Bradley with him.
He wanted them to see, to smell, to witness for themselves what they had been fighting against.
And Eisenhower was utterly shaken by it. He immediately told General George C. Marshall that what he had seen beggared description.
He understood documentation was essential. He ordered troops to photograph everything so no one could ever deny what had happened.
And Eisenhower was also determined to confront the German populace with their collective responsibility.
The Americans forced local inhabitants from the surrounding district to come and witness the crimes committed in their name.
They were made to walk past the piles of emaciated bodies, and then they were shown the bizarre and appalling collection of trophies the SS had collected.
Human organs in jars, shrunken heads, and most grotesquely lampshades and book bindings made from the skin of prisoners who were especially selected for their colorful tattoos.
And just as these horrors are being revealed to the world, the war is hit by a political earthquake.
On April 12th, the exact same day Eisenhower was touring, Ohrdruf President Franklin D. Roosevelt died.
It's hard to overstate the shock of that. Roosevelt had led the U.S. through the Great Depression, through almost the entire war.
His health was visibly deteriorating. At the Yalta Conference in February, he was clearly operating on sheer willpower.
But he left behind this monumental legacy, his vision for the post-war world, championed by the United Nations.
He wanted to end the old system of exclusive alliances, the spheres of influence, the balances of power.
Proposing a universal organization in which all peace-loving nations will finally have a chance to join.
Tragically, on April 12th, he suffered a massive brain hemorrhage and died within hours. He missed victory in Europe by just a matter of weeks.
The news was met with disbelief and immense national grief. Flags were lowered for 30 days.
But the war demanded immediate leadership. The mantle of commander-in-chief fell abruptly to the new president, Harry S. Truman.
A 60-year-old ex-senator, and as our sources say, a relatively unknown figure on the international stage.
He went from being a Midwestern politician to the leader of the Western world overnight.
Taking charge just as the conflict was entering its final, most dramatic and morally complex stage.
So we return to Europe, where German resistance is just dissolving.
But those political tensions that worried Churchill are playing out right on the front lines.
Churchill is still pushing for Berlin, but Eisenhower and the Americans remain committed to crushing organized resistance first.
And that rumor of the National Redoubt is still a driving factor.
Right. The fear of this Nazi stronghold in the Alps was enough to divert major American military efforts southwards.
Which meant a literal stop sign for the dash to Berlin. On April 11th, the U.S. Ninth Army reaches the River Elbe.
And they're ordered to halt, less than 50 miles from the capital, but their war of advance was over.
Meanwhile, the Russians are forging onwards with ruthless efficiency.
The Red Army captures Vienna by April 13th. In the Berlin bunker, Goebbels is celebrating Roosevelt's death, hoping the alliance will crumble.
A hope that lasted only a few days.
Because on April 16th, Stalin's massive final offensive on the Oder-Neisse River line begins.
And the Red Army had 3 critical objectives here.
First, obviously, capture Berlin, the ultimate symbolic prize.
Second, and this is crucial, seize any material and scientific personnel connected with the Nazi atom bomb program.
The first nuclear race. And third, purely geopolitical. snatch as much German territory as possible to solidify the post-war boundaries.
The scale of the assault was immense. 2.5 million Russians poised for the final offensive.
Led by Marshals Zhukov and Konev, who Stalin was actively encouraging to compete with each other.
A race to the finish.
And they had overwhelming superiority. Nearly 3-to-1 in troops, 4-to-1 in artillery, and a staggering 6-to-1 in armor.
But the terrain dictated the bloodshed. Zhukov faced the heavily fortified Silo Heights,
which turned into extremely fierce and bloody fighting. It cost him 4 agonizing days and immense casualties.
Meanwhile, Konev, further south, managed a more successful flanking maneuver and broke through quickly.
But by April 20th, Hitler's 56th birthday, Zhukov's men had compensated for their slow start and were already shelling the center of Berlin.
Over the next 48 hours, the Soviet forces enveloped the capital. By April 23rd, the city was completely isolated.
For Hitler, trapped in his bunker, there was no escape. He realized Berlin was doomed and declared his intention to stay and take his own life.
But the fighting for the city was still intensely bloody.
The defense was desperate and totally disorganized, about 45,000 troops in total.
A patchwork force of Waffen-SS, French volunteers, and thousands of poorly armed Volkssturm and Hitler Youth.
The Russians relied heavily on massive artillery and their Katyusha rockets, which just rained terror on the streets.
The fighting devolved into fierce, brutal, house-to-house combat.
And the sources are clear on the brutality of it. Nobody was taking any prisoners on either side.
Just fought to the absolute death for every building, every cellar.
And amidst all that chaos and blood, 80 miles to the southwest, a truly historic moment occurs at Torgau on the River Elbe.
Elbe Day, April 25th. The first physical contact between the Eastern and Western Allies.
Patrols from the U.S. 9th Army's 69th Division meet the 58th Guards Division from Konev's front.
A moment of immense celebration, friendship, gift exchanges.
But despite the outward unity, the underlying tensions were right there.
Immediately after the photos, the Americans returned to their side of the Elbe and stayed there.
And this all circles back to the political agreement at Yalta. Berlin was deep within the Soviet zone.
So for Eisenhower, there was literally nothing to be gained by fighting and dying for a city they'd have to hand over.
And his primary consideration was casualties. The risk of American losses in the chaos of Berlin, including from Soviet-friendly fire, was just not a price worth paying for a political trophy.
With the Americans halted, the Soviet momentum toward the bunker was remorseless.
By April 29th, the Russians are within a mile of it. And on that day, Hitler gets news that cements his final decision.
The news about Mussolini, captured, executed, and his body put on gruesome public display.
For Hitler, the message was clear. There would be no capture, no public humiliation.
He takes control of his own end. He marries Eva Braun, signs his will.
And on April 30th, 1945, with Russian shells shaking the concrete above, the newlyweds committed suicide.
Their bodies were carried outside and burned in the garden, the end of the 1,000-year Reich.
The fighting for the symbolic heart of the city continued briefly. On May 1st, the Reichstag finally falls to the Soviets.
And in the bunker, Joseph Goebbels carries out one final tragic act. He poisons his 6 children before he and his wife commit suicide.
After Hitler's death, events accelerated dramatically. On May 2nd, the commander of the Berlin garrison capitulates.
The guns in the city fall silent. The Soviets take nearly 500,000 German prisoners.
And the cost of that final battle gives terrifying justification to Eisenhower's decision.
The sources confirm it. At least 81,000 Soviet soldiers were killed in and around the city. Another 280,000 casualties.
A truly staggering price for one urban battle.
Tragically, the aftermath of the fighting was also incredibly dark.
Soviet soldiers, motivated by revenge and often fired up by alcohol, rampaged through Berlin, committing systematic atrocities against German civilians.
A horrific end to the fighting.
With Berlin secured, the unconditional surrender followed quickly. On May 4th, Montgomery receives the surrender of all German forces in Northwest Europe.
And that sets the stage for the formal end. On May 7th, the final unconditional surrender is signed at Eisenhower's HQ in Reims, France.
The ceasefire was set for 23.01 on May 8th, Victory in Europe Day, VE Day.
At 3 p.m., Churchill broadcast to the British people. The euphoria was overwhelming. It was truly his finest hour.
Across the Atlantic, the Americans celebrated too. For Harry Truman, May 8th, which was also his 61st birthday, he dedicated the victory to the memory of FDR.
But we should note the difference in commemoration. While the West celebrates on May 8th, the Russians honor May 9th.
For the Soviet people, it's a day of immense joy, but also intense sorrow. A day to remember the estimated 20 million Russian citizens who perished since the Nazi invasion.
The destruction of Nazi Germany was finally concluded on May 23rd with the arrest of Admiral Dönitz.
The major Allied powers, the US, UK, Soviet Union, and France, now ruled supreme over Hitler's disbanded empire.
But while Europe celebrated, those warning lights from the Pacific were flashing bright red.
The war raged on relentlessly against Japan.
And the Okinawa campaign finally ended on June 22nd, after a grueling 87 days. The cost was staggering.
Over 100,000 Japanese soldiers perished. Another 100,000 Okinawan civilians are thought to have died.
And for the victorious Americans, the price was horrific. More than 50,000 casualties, with at least 12,000 fatalities.
And this led military planners to a truly chilling calculation for the final invasion of mainland Japan, Operation Olympic.
They looked at the 30% casualty rate on Okinawa.
A number far higher than they predicted.
And they ran the numbers. A conservative estimate suggested that a staggering 300,000 Americans would be killed or injured during an invasion of the mainland.
300,000, that is an immense number.
And it meant that finding a path to victory that didn't sacrifice 250,000 American lives would demand a radical, and perhaps a terrible approach to warfare. So that brings us to the end of our deep dive. From the Rhine to the Reichstag, from the kamikazes to the concentration camps.
And the final words of Churchill really resonate, bridging that celebration with the burden to come. In his VE Day broadcast, he said, "We may allow ourselves a brief period of rejoicing, but let us not forget for a moment the toil and efforts that lie ahead. Japan, in all her treachery and greed, remains unsubdued."
And that terrifying burden of toil and efforts fell squarely on the shoulders of the new American leader.
Harry S. Truman. After just weeks in office, he's grappling with these chilling casualty estimates from Okinawa.
And he has the technology within his grasp to force Japan's surrender, facing the responsibility for launching a nuclear attack that could prevent the loss of 300,000 Americans.
Which raises an important question for you, the listener. When the cost of a conventional victory is calculated at 300,000 lives, does that change the moral calculus for adopting a new, devastating, but potentially life-saving approach to warfare?
That's something profound to think about. And if you appreciate us taking a deep dive into these critical war stories and bringing you the history behind the headlines, you can directly support the team that makes this research possible.
It helps us keep digging into these complex historical moments.
We invite you to check out the official War Stories merchandise. Every purchase helps keep the cameras rolling and the research going. You can find the shop link waiting for you right there in the description.